Okie dokie. All right. Thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. Just a reminder that we will be recording this webinar. I know I probably told you as you entered the room, and we will be sharing this wider on our YouTube as well. If there is any sensitive information, we will edit it out. But yeah, I am Gabrielle Reason. I'm director of the British Sauna Society. I am very interested in the subject. I love everything science and research to do with sauna. I'm very passionate about getting it into the hands of more people as a preventative healthcare tool that can improve all-round health. I'm very excited to have here Dr. Kath Jones. She's a great friend of the British Sauna Society and recently represented us at the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine Conference, which you may have seen us post about. And this is the presentation that she gave there. So she's sharing it out for our wider audience. And then I'll be chipping in a bit at the end to talk more about what the British Sauna Society does and our stance on all of this, and what we would love GPs and saunas to work together to do. So yeah, I will throw over to Kath Jones to intro herself and then yeah, kick on the webinar.
Thanks, Gabrielle. So I realised I've caught myself out because I've used the slides from Brighton. I've actually forgotten to change the name from Polly Wilson to Gabrielle Reason. So I've just spotted that now. So just in case anyone's observant. So as Gabrielle said, this is very similar to a presentation I did at the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine a couple of weeks ago. So really delighted to be here. And the first bit that I'm going to cover is really a framework that I've started using in my consultation, which really connects a more traditional sort of consultation I would do about persistent physical symptoms with activities like sauna bathing and how I see that link. How you can create that link within the consultation, and then Gabrielle obviously will talk a bit more about sauna bathing specifically. So it'd be really nice if people could put in the chat what their roles are and where they're based. That will really help me know kind of how to. I'm not always very good at finding the chat. Let me see if I can find. That will obviously help me know. Oh, technology is not always my strong point. How do I get onto the chat, Gabrielle? Ah, there we go. Okay, I found it. Right. So yeah, if people can just put so it'd be useful to know if people are health professionals or sauna operators, what sort of mix we've got in the audience. That would be really great. So head of operations, hi Ian. Pediatric endocrine nurse and sauna lover, physio, sauna artist. Oh, Brighton, yeah. GP from Dublin, sauna lover, anaesthetist. Liz. All right, so we've got quite a mix. So look, all sauna lovers by the looks of it, but a bit of a mix of health professionals and sauna operators. Okay, great. Quite a few people from Brighton. Kate, yeah, Kate, we've spoken, haven't we, before? Kirsty, yeah. So I think we've had some WhatsApp chat, hasn't we? Okay, so so as you can see, there's a picture of me in a sauna. I am an NHS GP, but I also have a business called Wild-Ness Health, and I run education and wellbeing for health events for health professionals. So this has taken one of our retreats a couple of years ago, and in fact, all the retreats you do have sauna bathing as an integral part of that. Because I probably don't need to tell you, you know, how it really helps people to relax, but also really to come together. So this group of people had never met 24 hours before, and I think the photo really captures, you know, how it brings people together and really creates a space of trust and safety, which is exactly what we're aiming for in our events. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, how I kind of got into all of this work. This is where I live, in a little village called Drumnadrochit, overlooking Loch Ness. Until quite recently, that was my garden, the bottom left hand corner, and it's a really special place. Obviously, it's got incredible landscape, but it's also got an amazing sense of community and some really talented people, which has been really important to me over the last couple of years as I've kind of ventured into the business world from the NHS, and I'll touch on that a bit more later. So I moved here in 2016 to take up the role as an associate medical director. But for the first couple of years, I really didn't make the most of the scenery or the community, and I got really kind of embroiled in quite a tricky job, um, and really started to get quite burnt out. And when I went back into clinical practice in 2019, this is a bit how I felt really. So this is from British Medical Journal by a urologist called Jonathan Glass, an opinion piece in which we talk a lot in healthcare about the heart sink patient, but he was talking about the heart sink doctor. And in retrospect, this is really how I was feeling, was just very disengaged, very distracted, just couldn't really make myself care too much. I was very fortunate. I think so, was so experienced that I managed to kind of nothing major happened, but I really was hating my job. And I'm sure it was not a particularly, I think I would have probably failed my own friends and family test in terms of how I was in myself. And really got to the point where I thought I actually need to get out of this. This is not doing me any good or any good for the patients. And so I kind of this I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with the drama triangle, but through a chance series of conversations, ended up having some coaching, and it introduced me to this concept of the drama triangle, which is a very unstable interpersonal interaction described by I think it was a psychotherapist called Stephen Cartman in 1965. And if you're not familiar with it, it's incredibly useful to know about in general life. So it's this idea that we can play different roles and flip between different roles. And when you're in the drama triangle, the roles that you flip between are the victim, where you feel you can't cope with things, the rescuer, where you're trying to fix stuff and you do stuff to people, rather than encourage them to do it for themselves. And it's called the perpetrator in the drama triangle for the purposes of the health professional kind of view. I've called it the critic, where you think that everyone else is the problem, and you're blameless. And I was kind of caught in this dynamic really, where I felt pretty overwhelmed, but I was still trying to fix patients. You know, all these patients were coming in with what I would have then called medically unexplained symptoms, and I was kind of doing stuff to them, doing blood tests, giving them drugs, and nothing was improving. And so then I really started to feel that it was actually the patient that was the problem, and not me. So it was got to be pretty fed up really, and had this coaching, and it was so powerful. I could see what was happening. And because it was so powerful for me, I actually went on to train to be a coach myself. And that's where I learned about what's called the polyvagal theory. Have people on this call heard of the polyvagal theory? I'll probably struggle to get back to the chat to work out what you're saying, but basically the polyvagal theory is this idea that we can be in three states. We can be what's called in the ventral vagal state, when we're in our window of tolerance, where we feel we can cope with whatever's happening in our life. But then we can be in a hyper aroused state where we feel anxious, we're in fight and flight. So our body is responding to a perceived threat, and is mobilizing everything to get ready to be able to run away from that threat. But when that goes on for a prolonged period of time, we can go into hypoarousal, which is a kind of shutdown state. And you hear people about people having breakdowns, and so both the hyper aroused and the hypo aroused are this concept of dysregulation. So the nervous system is dysregulated, and so what you might consider health to be is actually when you expand your window of tolerance, because all of us are going to have stress in our life at some point. So when you expand your window of tolerance, you expand the range of stress that you can manage before you go into hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused state. And these are kind of slightly more descriptive terms of what those feel like. And if we look at these three states, no prizes for guessing what people normally feel in a sauna. It can make you feel very relaxed, can't it, and very safe. So the emotional state, at ease, connected, joyful, warm. In contrast to in fight and flight, when people are feeling out of control of their emotions, and in the worst state where people are starting to shut down and they're feeling completely disconnected. And so as a coach, I learned about this polyvagal theory, and I found it really so helpful. It was funny today. I was telling Gabrielle I managed to leave my laptop in a soft play centre this afternoon. And I was part of the way home with my sister, and I realised, and we drove back to get it, and she said, "You're so calm." I would have been totally like losing the plot. And I said, "It's learning about this. It really helps you to know how harmful it is to be constantly in fight and flight, you know, or to get to the stage where you feel shut down. So actually learning about these concepts can be really, really helpful, either for us as health professionals, but also to explain to patients. And what I then learned about was actually what happens when you become dysregulated over a long period of time and your body is starting to shut down. It's like the body applies an emergency brake. I don't know if people have seen this chessboard illusion. So the chessboard illusion really is saying, does maybe Gabrielle can tell me since I can't see the chat. Does anyone on this call, if you haven't seen this, if you've seen this before, then maybe keep quiet. But does anyone on this call think that A and B are the same colour? I don't know if I've shown this to you before, Gabrielle. Have I shown it to you?
No, I haven't, but I have a
No.
feeling I know it because I did a section at uni.
So the concept is basically shows the concept of predictive coding. So it shows how our brain basically copes with an environment that's completely overstimulating. And what our brain does is it shuts a lot of stimulus out and it does pattern recognition. So in this case, A and B are actually the same color. But what our brain does was it says, number one, this is a chessboard. So A and B are different colours because it's a checkered board. But number two, there's a cylinder next to B, and that's casting a shadow over B. So although B, the information into our eyes tells us that B is the same colour as A, our brain, without us being aware, lightens the colour that we're seeing for B. So it's this idea that we think that you know the thing we see in the environment is the reality of what's happening, but this pattern recognition that goes on every day. So another example of that, going to pick up my sister from the airport this morning, and I get to a certain roundabout and I always turn left to go for work, to go to work, and I needed to turn right for the airport, and I wasn't paying attention. I turned left to go to work. We have these patterns, you know, which short circuit for us. But the problem is when your body is starting to, you've been dysregulated for a long time, and your body's starting to shut down. What the body can do is create persistent physical symptoms to literally stop you doing stuff. So persistent fatigue, persistent pain. And so this is now the underpinning theory behind what we would have called medically unexplained symptoms actually have a complete explanation for why they happen. And now we have functional MRI scanning. We can see that actually in chronic pain, it's the emotion center of the brain that's lit up, not the pain center of the brain. So hopefully this will be apparent why I'm telling you this as I go on. So this led me to really kind of redesign how I saw health, and I think Gabrielle's going to touch on this again later. But this idea of whole person care, so this idea of reimagining health as increasing what we can tolerate rather than curing pain and illness. Maybe it's actually about being able to cope or even thrive in the pain in the face of pain and illness. And the importance of kind of language and tools that help people make sense of their experience. But also this idea of this mind, body, emotion connection, and that maybe symptoms are actually a message or a signal. You know, persistent symptoms are actually a signal that you're beyond your window of tolerance. And you know, the importance of community and connection within that, and how our lived experience influences how we experience the world today. So that pattern, that predictive coding thing that happens. And we all know that when you know, for example, if you're having a problem with your boss, the physical symptoms you can get as you approach the workplace, you know, the butterflies in the stomach or the flushing of the face. This is this predictive coding. The body is predicting threat. So, in my NHS work over the last couple of years, I've been trying to work out how I can kind of bridge this gap between how I've been practicing, which really wasn't working for me, and I had the feeling it wasn't working for my patients, to how I wanted to now practice given these new things that I'd started to understand. And I've ended up developing what I've called the 6-step framework. And the idea is this can be adapted for various roles across the NHS, community services, the third sector. And so it's this idea of firstly creating trust and safety. So if we're talking from a GP consultation framework, this is the bit that you do in the room. So this is the bit where you're with the person. And it's hard to create trust and safety over the phone when you can't see someone, for example. But obviously, in terms of context of saunas, this is absolutely, the kind of thing that as a sauna operator you'd be looking to create. So it's an acronym that's MEND the gap, if you like. So MEND, mindset and energy. So how you enter into the space, whether that's into the consulting room or into the sauna, has a massive impact on the people around you. So being really mindful of where you are in that polyvagal theory, is it a day where you are feeling hyper aroused, you are a bit in fight and flight because the car's broken down and the kids didn't want to go to school and all the rest of it. And if that's the case, how can you kind of ground yourself so that you're in that ventral vagal state when you're trying to create that atmosphere of trust and safety for others? So the next step is about noticing patterns. So that's about really this concept of symptoms as a signal, and I'll go on to talk about each of these steps in a bit more detail. The third step is about developing new narratives. So I touched on the importance of language before, and we know that language has a massive impact on people. The words we use, the descriptions we give people, there's lots of evidence of the big impact that has on people's well-being. So the second phase, the idea is that this can be done outside the consulting room, so you can kind of resource people with various activities and links. So glimmers of hope, recovery stories, activities and resources. So obviously sauna bathing can be an activity, and people and places, so connecting people to supportive communities. So I'll go through, has anyone got any questions at this stage before I go talk a bit more about each of those steps?
There aren't any in the chat
No.
now.
No. Okay. So mindset. So I said a bit about heart sync. So the drama triangle, the victim, I can't cope with this, the rescuer, I must fix this, the judge, you're the problem. And as someone training and coaching, I got to learn about the empowerment dynamic. And the empowerment dynamic is kind of the antidote to the drama triangle. But in the context of healthcare, I've called it shifting from the heart sync dynamic to the healing dynamic. So instead of being the rescuer where you're trying to fix patients, so the patient with persistent physical symptoms, where you're doing endless tests, giving endless drugs, it's really changing to be the coach. So instead of doing stuff to the person, it's really you can choose this. You have choices. You have power within you to overcome this situation. And if you shift from being the rescuer to the coach, what that does is it encourages the person to shift from the victim to the creator, where they start to recognize choices in their life, choices in the stories they tell themselves about their life, choices in their lifestyle, choices in who they spend time with, choices on what activities they do. And then the judge shifts to the challenger. So that the empowerment dynamic or the healing dynamic is a much more stable dynamic. So people don't flip roles quite so much. So that's really about the kind of mindset that you go into. If for example, you're a GP and you have someone with chronic pain, the traditional approach is to give out painkillers. But actually, if you shift into this other way of being, you can use a psychoeducational approach. So you can teach them about some of these tools and give them, activities to do that are going to help them feel more in control of their health. So the second step is about recognizing patterns of symptoms and patterns of stress. So there's an organization called the Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms, who are a group of doctors in America who do amazing work in this field. And they've developed something called the 12-question test. And the higher the score out of 12, the more likely it is that the symptoms are what we would call functional. So there's no structural, nothing's broken in the body, but it's this predictive coding pattern where the nervous system's feeling overwhelmed. And so the mind is generating symptoms of pain or fatigue or various other presentations that can manifest like this. So it doesn't mean that the person's faking it or they're imagining it. It's a real generated signal in the brain, but it's not coming from something being broken in the body. So the 6 elements of the patterns of symptoms that make this more likely are people who've had symptoms for quite a while, or the tests are normal, the symptoms began without a clear cause, The symptoms vary, move around, fluctuate. Stress obviously exacerbates the symptoms, and none of the treatments they've tried have helped. But we also know, obviously, that lived experience impacts on the likelihood of developing persistent physical symptoms. So if you've had adverse childhood experiences, so grown up in a house with domestic violence, or had other difficult experiences in life, we know that you are more likely to develop this pattern of symptoms. But also personality factors like being self-critical, perfectionist, people pleaser, and feeling anxious or feeling low or hopeless. So the 12-question test as a health professional can be really helpful, because it can avoid you just in that cycle of repeating tests or keep giving people different drugs, to actually start having a different conversation where you say, would you mind if I talk to you about this different approach, and start explaining some of these concepts to them. So language is really, really important. So the traditional approach would be to say your symptoms are medically unexplained, there's no cure, there's nothing we can do for you, you'll have to learn to live with it. And instead, you're using things like, this is, your body is not broken, this is a good thing to have. I can teach you skills that will help you overcome these symptoms. So it's a complete polar opposite dialogue. So the second phase is where you're trying to spark hope and agency. So recovery story. So this is one of the first patients that I tried this approach with, Judith. Judith's 75 now. She's retired head teacher, and I was pretty scared when I first started talking to this about patients, and Judith just totally went for it. And actually, after 2 consultations with me, she stopped all her painkillers and cancelled her knee replacement. And this photo was taken at a conference I organised this March about this approach, where she was one of the keynote speakers. And for her, it's been completely transformational. But not everyone has been like Judith, and it's really important to say that. But it is an example of what's possible. And I've kind of entered this whole community of people that have used these approaches to recover from all sorts of conditions, and so it's very, very powerful. Living Proof, who I had an image of in the previous slide, they have a lot of recovery stories for all these different conditions, where people have previously been told that there's no cure. So activities. So this concept of being dysregulated, causing generating these physical symptoms. So that's the explanation of the symptoms. So the solution is to calm the nervous system. So to help people recognize people, places, activities that make them feel psychologically safe. So getting people to think about that. And normally when you first say that to people, that's not something they've ever thought about. And again, obviously for many people, sauna bathing is an activity that it offers, it's an activity that's relaxing, but it also actually creates the community feel, so this is the equivalent of what I've got of sauna bathing in my local area, an organisation called Flip of the Coin, which meet under a lovely stretch tent until Storm Amy destroyed it a couple of weeks ago. And it provides people with just so much. So this is a quote from one of the people that attends this. And I think really what I wanted to finish on was to say that I first became aware of this organisation running this about 18 months ago, and we've been working together and looking at referral pathways and how we make it more accessible for people. And the person who runs the organisation actually applied for a grant to Creative Scotland, and I wrote a testimonial for them, and she's just been awarded £80,000. And then from a chance conversation where one of the GPs came to visit, I said, oh, there's a field just behind the practice. Why don't you see if you can get that? And within 3 weeks, she's actually secured the field just behind the practice at Peppercorn Rent for the next year. So I think when you as a GP reach out to the third sector and really look to support each other, it's really amazing what can happen. So that's the end of my. I think I need to stop sharing. Is that right, Gabrielle?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will take over. If you've got questions for Kath, let's keep them to the end. I'll just do a little bit and then we'll have more of a discussion at the end. So yeah, do share them in the chat. Okay, let me. Okay. Great. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, just to pick up on Kath's uh, look at the way that her amazing approach to whole person health can be integrated into sauna practice. So I think I'm sure lots of people who are sauna operators here and know sauna bathing particularly well can see exactly where sauna kind of touches on all of these amazing things. So there's this idea that it's going from that curative to preventative approach. So that is, rather than waiting for everyone to become ill and then giving them lots of drugs or kind of taking a very, very focused approach on curing disease, it's actually looking at health as something that we take control of, and we're improving it before that damage is even done. There's this idea of moving from rescue to resilience. So actually, this is making the individual the own architect of their health. So making it a really active thing that they feel that they are in control of, rather than what a lot of modern medicine does, which is pushes people into a bit more of a passive role. So, you are kind of thinking, oh, I can live my life how I want because there's the NHS, there's a doctor who's going to look after me. And often when they then become fall into ill health, they realise that it's not actually that useful. And again, you get this uncomplicated relationship that happens of where it's again, all of the problems that Kath outlined are this kind of approach of the heart sink GP. And then I think there's also this really interesting one, which is beyond just looking at medicine as biology. So again, a lot of modern medicine just looks at the individual and looks like the individual physiological pathways and where medicine can go in and interact with that when it goes wrong. But I think there is a lot of discussion and a lot of research emerging that actually we are very much connected beings, and all our health is heavily impacted by our social connections, but also to a certain degree our spiritual connections as well, and our sense of connectedness to nature, to each other, but also to a wider, more existential approach. So this idea of social belonging, if anyone was at the Sauna Summit this year and saw Dr. Martha Newson's talk, she presented this fantastically. It's this kind of fact that social isolation is as harmful to our health as smoking or obesity in predicting our mortality. So there's so much made of, how much people should lose weight, people should quit smoking. I think in this particular case, it's the same impact of stopping a 15 cigarettes a day habit. If you go to the doctors, no one is questioning, how much are you hanging out with your friends? Do you see your family that often? It's always, how much do you smoke? How many alcohol units do you drink per week? It's just not being prioritized at the moment. There's also this really fascinating people who like research. So Naomi Eisenberger at the UCLA, she's got this amazing avenue of research looking at the association between social stress and social connection and what that does to our immune system and our levels of chronic inflammation. She also does a lot on how physical pain and emotional pain are incredibly similar things in our body. So again, a real whole body, mind body approach to looking at health. But what she's found in this review is that social stress and isolation increase our chronic inflammation. So if we think that a lot of modern diseases, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, cancer are all underlined by this idea of like inflammation that is triggered by aging. But also social stress can really, really interact to make that worse. On the flip side, chronic inflammation also makes us actually more sensitive to social stress and isolation. So if people are living unhealthy lives, and pretty much everything of modern life increases our levels of chronic inflammation, smoking, lack of sleep, overwork, obesity, all of that actually makes us more sensitive to these stresses. So if we have high levels of chronic inflammation, we're more likely to kind of see people as slighting us. We're more likely to be upset when someone rejects us or if we get fired from work. So it's this incredibly self-reinforcing situation. When we look at sauna, we know that actually that is a very powerful way to quite dramatically and quickly rebalance those levels of chronic inflammation as well. So there is, again, that really interesting approach to impacting inflammation through not just the heat, but also for the social element to it. So bringing back to Kath was talking about this idea of whole person care in the sauna, and I think when I look at that, there's so many elements that sauna touches. So this idea that we can reimagine the story of health and the importance of that for whole person care. So when you look at sauna, there is actually something very, I think, exciting about it for a lot of people. So it actually presents health as this lived practice, this ritual that we can do. And it's not something that we just, again, have to wait until disease happens, or not something that we're having to drag ourselves out to go for a 5K run or down to the gym. And I think there's also something very heartening that a lot of modern medicine, whether that is in approaches to nutrition or like looking at the psychedelic renaissance, we are increasingly drawing on these ancient tools for these modern problems. And I think, again, that is beginning to help people to see that it's not just modern medicine, and to become a lot more exploratory with alternative approaches to health. The second element of this idea that health belongs to everyone is bang in line with this kind of Finnish mantra that in the sauna everyone is equal. And I think there's something very nice around it, kind of focuses on you and puts you at the center of that control. So it gives that person a sense of agency over their own health. It's not something that is conditional on a practitioner or a professional to give to them. But there's also this really interesting idea that it's this self-directed exposure and pacing. You're going into the sauna, you're feeling the temperature, you're deciding how long you're in there, you're deciding how long and how frequently you're going from week to week. And again, there's this idea, it's really beginning to get you in connection with your own body. So again, we get asked a lot, how long should you spend in the sauna? And people are setting timers on their watches. And I think most people here would always advocate, you have to listen to your body. So there is a sense that you're really beginning to get people to tap into their own physiological responses. And there's, again, a wider conversation. It's probably a webinar in itself, that actually a lot of modern mental health problems arise because of issues with the top-down regulatory system, beginning to see patterns and sensory inputs that aren't there. So, for example, in depression, you would say, no one loves me, my family is not there for me, when actually the sensory bottom-up inputs suggest otherwise. Again, psychosis, a very obvious one as well. So a lot of alternative approaches to health are actually all about improving that connection between the top-down and the sensory input, in that we kind of tap into that bottom up sensory input in order to connect and fix the bottom down processing issues that result in mental health issues. There's this idea of mind, body, emotion connection. Again, this self-directed exposure. Oh no, that's one. Hang on, I've done that. Yeah, interpersonal and related determinants of health. That should not be like that. But so the mind, body, emotion connection. So we have this idea that we have the mind, we have the body, but also there is this emotional and social level of it. And again, I'll go into the next slide about we have these three pillars of health, the mental, the physical, and the social. The stress being a signal and a teacher. I think this is a particularly intriguing one. We talk a lot about sauna's ability to rebuild resilience, but what does that really mean from a physiological point of view? So if you look at how our body responds to heat stress, it releases, as everyone is kind of commonly known, beta endorphins. They make us feel good, painkillers, etc. But the lesser known one is actually another endogenous opioid called dynorphin. And dynorphin is something that makes us feel uncomfortable. So that is released certainly in response to heat stress. It's the thing that shouts to you, get out, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to be here anymore. It's again released in exercise. So if you're doing a high intensity class, it's telling you to stop, this hurts, I'm tired. But actually what you see is the more that dynorphin is released, the more you get a upregulation of beta endorphin receptors. So the more you lean into that discomfort, the more you build your painkilling ability. So you can actually see that there is a way that our body responds to discomfort by becoming more resilient to stress and to pain. Context matters. So again, the context that we're in, We know community sauna is a huge thing in the UK, very proud of it. And it's really there to create inclusion. We hear from many people who, they'll turn up to a community sauna session, they'll be there with strangers, they might be slightly isolated in their community, they might be new to their community, and within a few sessions, they're beginning to feel that sense of real inclusion and local belonging. And again, local belonging and the sense of belonging to a group is very important for long-term health outcomes. The experiences growth point, there's this idea that shared heat kind of dissolves this hierarchy. We have this sense that people go in, and for some reason, it seems to get people to open up. It gets people to talk. It dissolves those normal barriers that we have about talking to strangers. We become more vulnerable. People express themselves a lot more, and there's a sense of shared empathy. And that's already been researched as well to see if sauna use can be used alongside CBT. I was about to say ChatGPT, CBT as a way to enhance approaches for making depression better. So yeah, the three pillars of sauna health. So we break this down largely into physical health, mental health, and social health. There is an argument that there is actually also spiritual health. So yeah, again, that's a whole nother debate for another day. Everything that is on the slide, I won't go too far into through all of these. I think again, you can look a lot of this up. If there is, for all of these points, if there's research that's looked at it and actually found this positive association, then we've referenced it. If there is something listed that isn't that doesn't have a research reference, then it is just anecdotal. So yeah, we would love to explore with research groups actually coming up with data to prove this, which is things that we've experienced ourselves, or we hear time and time again from sauna operators and sauna bathers. And I won't go into that too much. But yeah, for even all of the ones that are listed, there's always the question of how reliable is the evidence. There was a great article in The Economist over the summer, which was again looking from a very kind of thorough point of view of like how much can we actually believe in that this research is there. So there's longitudinal studies of limited use in the UK. So everyone is very familiar with the Laukkanen studies from the Kuopio ischemic heart studies out of Finland. So for those who aren't familiar with it, it is a study of over 2,000 Finnish men that's looking at them over I think it's like two, maybe more decades now, and looking at how frequently they sauna bathe and then the incidence of mortality and development of various diseases. The issue is that they're Finnish, so they're like most frequent is 4 to 7 times a week. They only start at once a week. So in the UK, if people are saunaing once a week, we think that's brilliant. That's going a lot, but to them it's not. So we have this whole thing which we call the Laukkanen gap. So what happens if you go from never sauna bathing to going at least once a week. So again, a lot of the work that we're wanting to do and is already beginning to flourish is getting data for that. We're in an advantageous position in the UK in that not many people, we don't have a widespread sauna culture, so not a lot of people really know what to expect when they go into the sauna. So there is an opportunity that we can really start looking at people who don't have any preconceived notions of what benefits they might receive when they go in there. There's also another issue in that the gold standard to really say, yes, there is an impact here is a randomized controlled study, but important in that is to have a placebo control. So that's really difficult. So in that you would have to give someone the test condition. So actually having a very hot sauna experience. The placebo would be not having a hot sauna experience. And it's very hard to put people into not a hot room and convince them that they're having a sauna. There is a really good way around this. So Dr. Charles Reason, in his depression studies, he actually got around that by just putting people in front of very, very hot lights. So they felt a bit hot, but it wasn't to the level of, he actually used an infrared sauna in the test condition. So it didn't increase their core temperature, but they did feel hot and sweaty and uncomfortable. So yeah, again, research groups across the UK, we've already had a number of people come and have already started researching this, and there's research in progress. So we've got the University of Greenwich, we've had the University of Coventry, University of Portsmouth, University of Bangor, and again, more people are beginning to come and ask us about would we support their studies. So we are more than happy to do that as the BSS. We can assist with participant recruitment, we can assist with publicising studies and just general checking if any experimental design is really testing for authentic sauna culture as well. So if there are any GPs and health professionals, or if any sauna operators are wondering what the best way is to actually start these relationships, I think the first one is for any GPs just to get them to experience it. So inviting them to come to a local sauna and try it for themselves. We had the last year for Social Prescribing Day in conjunction with Sauna Our Souls. Was a huge effort to get offer free saunas to NHS health workers. So lots of people got to go and enjoy it there. There's a second bit which is just about developing relationships. So if you get people into the saunas, making sure that those are existing. So if you're a GP and you're interested in this, we have this wonderful new sauna map, which will be soon to launch on the British Sauna Society website. You'll be able to use this to find your nearest local sauna. You can then contact them, see if they are in the market for developing a social prescribing program. Many are. This is pretty much a uniform thing. I don't think I've ever heard of a sauna operator who is not interested in this. And then work with them to develop programs, whether that is using Kath's a 6-step model, or anything that is more in line with what their particular problems are for their local area. So that might be connecting with local social prescribers, or it might even be as simple as connecting with just local charities or support groups as well. So if you've got a local addiction charity, reaching, or a older person charity, or an isolated people in the community, reaching out to them and presenting sauna as a potential nice to do activity for these groups. And then really crucially, it's tracking the outcomes and the impact of those. If you run a pilot, please do collect data and suggest the impact of that as well, because that is the language that we need to be able to publicize that and to get more people interested in this. Any questions? I'll go to the chat soon. Again, if you want to talk to Kath or I about anything that we've covered today, there are our contact details